Welcome to the last video on the leadership segment in the Accelerator. This video is going to be about empathy and leadership. And you might be wondering, what has this got to do with anything? So firstly, it is the underlying skill across all of the first principles that we mentioned earlier. So coming to, let's say, clarity of vision, empathy ensures that our vision isn't going to create unforeseen circumstances, and it checks in on the people involved and the people that it impacts, that it's actually going to be effective, or else you end up just pushing through on a particular initiative or program, and then you come back and say, actually, we've caused more damage than what we were thinking about doing. So empathy ensures that your vision is actually going to be effective. Number two, still actually on the clarity of vision piece, remember that messaging diagram? Empathy ensures that you are more open to the feedback, so you're iterating a message that is more effective. You're more aware of the noise, all right, because you're putting yourself in the shoes of others. You start to think, hey, actually, this person's got a lot of emails. Should we be communicating sustainability messaging in a different format, in a place that there's less noise in, for example? And of course, in simplifying the message so that they're having to decode it and understand it a little bit more effectively. And coming to designed relationships or design culture, you are paraphrasing a lot in order to communicate what's interpreted, to make sure that you are not assuming, so that you can avoid avoidable assumptions. And lastly, when it came to exceptional organization, empathy is used tactically and strategically here, because when you understand people a little bit more, you can start making strategic decisions to ensure that communication is going to be more effective, that the right people, the best people, are doing the most important jobs, and that resources are actually going to where they should be going. So, diving into what empathy is. And now this brings us to the definition of empathy, which most people believe is to put yourself in the shoes of others. Now, this is only half of the definition. I turn to Brené Brown, who I will link some great content to in the link below the video. She says that in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. So for example, if your customer tells you that they're having frustration in a certain part of the brand or product experience, and if you say, when I do it, I don't feel that way, that's not empathy. They're trying to tell you their truth, and if you say, I don't believe it, and you take decisions based off that information, you're going to make some pretty poor decisions because it's not based on the truth. And that's the same thing with your team. If they tell you these things as well, and you're like, well, when I was your age, I kind of just sucked it up and did it. Things are not the same anymore. So I'll give you a real world example where with BlackBerry, I'm sure you would have heard of them, where Mike Lazaridis, I cannot say his name, so I'm not going to say it again, was famously quoted for saying many things, but I thought these were the best ones. Camera phones would be rejected by corporate users back in 2003. The most exciting mobile trend is full of QWERTY keyboards. As you can see, I'm sorry, it really is. I'm not making this up. Where's BlackBerry now? And what's interesting, if you can compare this to another founder, Steve Jobs, he originally said that adding phone capabilities to an iPod was the dumbest idea he'd ever heard of. And look at where they are now. Like half market share in the world is full of iPhones. And he was also luckily quoted for saying that it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do. So interesting there, because a lot of people are also aware that Steve is not very empathetic in his approach, very aggressive even, which is why I need to end this piece with empathy is a visibility tool. By feeling, considering, and engaging, you can get a better understanding of others in order to take the appropriate action. It could be used for good and it can be used for bad. And the most manipulative people in the world are empaths. That's not a discussion for this Accelerator. You can follow the Leading with Empathy channel and program for more insights on that. So moving forward, in the West, we're very scientific in the way that we do things. So that means that we observe and then we describe what it is that we're seeing. So with empathy, there are like 7 different there's more, but they're the 3 core definitions which we're going to explore here. So cognitive, which is to think about what someone else is feeling, emotional, which is to feel what they're feeling, and compassionate, which is to do something based on what you think they're feeling, what you feel that they're feeling. Now, this is great to understand what like where you are, what you could be doing, what someone else is feeling, like their levels of empathy, but it's descriptive and not prescriptive. And this is why we have a lot of pitfalls with compassionate kind of work that we see in the world. So we turn to religion, actually. So we look at Buddhism, for example. There are many attitudes of compassion and empathy. And here we have metta, mudita, karuna, and upekkha. And these are their definitions. I'll get to why this is relevant very shortly. So metta is the attitude where you wish for others and oneself to experience happiness. It's very pure. Mudita is the practice of taking joy in others' happiness and success. Karuna is a response to suffering, and you want to reduce that suffering. And upekkha, as a definition, is a balanced mental state that remains compassionate, yet understands the limits of control. In layman terms, that's where no matter what you do, there's going to be suffering anyway. And so you channel your energy to reduce suffering without having to suffer yourself. Let's give you some examples. So at work, practice of metta is that you're just happy that your team is doing well, and you'll take actions for them to be more happy. And that branches into mudita, which is loving to seeing a fulfilled team. Hey, let's organize a team bonding activity so that we can bond more, that we could be happier, we could be more fulfilled. Karuna, hey, you look like you're not doing well. What can we do to help? So you're trying to alleviate the suffering of others. You've identified it. And upekkha, something's not working. You're not happy, I'm not happy at work. I'm going to have to let you go. What I will do, though, is refer you to a couple of places that I think would use your skills. And being honest about that, and the referrals and testimonials, of course. So here are some simple examples of how this is applied. Because the Sustainability Accelerator, we're going to dive into examples of social sustainability. So to be more specific, in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, this silo of work within social sustainability. So with metta, acknowledging that improving project processes is a journey to inclusion. So you're never going to get finished where you're perfectly inclusive and diverse in your company. That's just never going to happen. It's a journey. So just wanting a workspace where everyone is happy and acknowledging that by constantly working on those processes. So that's your practice of metta. Mudita, celebrating a team member from an underrepresented group for being promoted. So for example, finally having like an indigenous or a female board member, for example. Karuna, the work in recognizing that some team members and customers are excluded in key discussions. So in the formulation of your product, or if you're building a road somewhere, bringing some people in for discussions and consultations, that is the actions of Karuna. And upekkha, let me just clarify that. I could already intuitively sense something there. So with Karuna, you're saying that if you're to build a product and you're saying, hey, this is what we want to do, we're assuming that this is exactly what will solve the problems of our customers, that's an assumption. So you're bringing them in and saying, hey, look, you're not happy with the way things are currently done. So that's why we're going to bring you on board, so we can understand your suffering a little bit more, your problems, so that we can solve them better. And we're not going to put any bias in that discussion. We're going to ask you what your problem is, and then we're going to be curious about it. So when you're saying that you're suffering or you're frustrated at this bit, tell me more. What about that was frustrating? Right? So that's the practice of karuna. Upekkha. So focusing on what you can do despite facing pushback on making accessibility a priority in the design process. That's more frustration for sustainability professionals, because modeling inclusive behavior, advocating for mental improvements is a slog. So this is more of a practice to ensure that you are looking after yourself despite the pushback that you might be having in sustainability work, whether it's dealing with frustrations with your board, the government, your customers even. And I'll give you an example. The best way to actually do that is with an actual story, which I'll share with you. But I know that there's a little bit more with upekkha. The further definition is to say that there should not be a reduction in goodwill, which means that the things that you are doing that are reducing suffering should not cause you to suffer as well. Now with upekkha, there's another part of that definition, which is where it should be about opening your heart to the lessons of your head. And we see this when places like healthcare, where doctors and nurses are burning themselves out, or with social work, with youth workers, where they end up suffering as well. So we know that no matter how much you put your energy into certain situations, it's not going to perfectly fix problems. If that happened, we would have no problems in the world. And so we turn to, typically in real life we turn to our elders for this, but unfortunately we're starting to lose faith in religion, ironically. So what we're missing with that is elders who would be having experience, a lot of reflection, or monks who all they do is reflect and consider what is really compassion. So you see that a lot of the empathy work that we're talking about now is thinking about your thinking, thinking forward, trying to avoid assumptions. And when you do that, you're actually expanding your capacity for compassion, because now you can start taking actions and being very clear, very sure of yourself, and knowing that I'm going to do it this way, because if I was going to do it originally this way, it would have resulted in outcomes that actually we would not have wanted, right? So I'll give you an example of where leadership like that has resulted in really great outcomes for me. So here it's called the win-win story, where there was reverse mentorship from an intern that I had back in 2018. So back then we had just launched Under Armour in Cambodia. It was a very successful opening. And so I gave my team the rest of the end of the year off. It was already like mid-December. So I said, take an extra week or two. And I had a senior government official call me about the launch of this big memorial called the Win-Win Memorial to celebrate 20 years of peace in Cambodia. It was actually a really well-meaning initiative, except it was in 3 weeks. They had like hundreds of booths that they needed filling out with vendors. They needed a lot more help, and they didn't have any budget. So I declined. I said, I just don't have time or space to do this. I've got no team. I've just given them all time off. And he tried to push, and he insisted that I help. And I said, no, I can't do this. Anyway, then this person's father rang, and who was a minister, and he said, look, this is for the Prime Minister. You really, really want to be involved. And I said, I'll call you back. Now, in situations like that, I'm not Cambodian. I'm an expat. I had a small business, and it wasn't a threat at all. It was just a sign that if I didn't support now, I probably won't have much work in the future. And so I was sweating. My palms are sweaty. And so Tini, who was the intern at the time, she was the president of Volunteer Nation. So with 2,500 volunteers in Melbourne alone, she looks at me and she's like, what's up? There's nothing to sort of stress about, you know, like, you taught me this. What do you want to do about it now? For her, not absorbing more of my suffering and like freaking out with me, she just observed, held space, and said, well, where do you want to put your energy? What do we want to do about it right now? And I said, I'm not really sure. She said, well, I can get help. So she came back an hour later. She recruited 40 volunteers. We had a Facebook group. She put the message out there. She rang a few people. And she said, we've got this. So you might not have our usual team, but we have project managers and teachers and people who are not working at the moment because it's time off. They're happy to volunteer for you. Let's figure this out. And so we did some training over the 3 weeks. We recruited the vendor, and we actually went over and above. We had a team of about 15 or was it 18 volunteers that we did research training for. A lot of these students who didn't get the sort of training in university, they got it with us during this period. And we put together a survey on waste separation and recycling and messaging in the area. And we ended up publishing a report. There were 385 one-on-one interviews done over this 3-day period. We had these 40 volunteers turn up from 4 in the morning to midnight every day for 3 days during New Year's. And we ended up sending this report pro bono to the UNDP, to the Ministry of Environment, to the City Council to help them with their policy advising. This led to more work for us in the future because we were just transitioning into more sustainability work. So that gave us a leg up for tenders in the future, which was great. And regarding the government, our logo was listed as one of the sponsors and with the kind of work that we did. And an undersecretary at a different ministry saw that and reached out. We did some more pro bono work for them, which ended up resulting in a free office. Well, I shouldn't say free. In an office where there was a good trade. We haven't had to pay rent for like 5 years, or utilities or parking over this period. And it led to more and more work and more collaborations together. So that ended up happening because in that moment, she exhibited compassion in a way, upeka, in a way that reminded me of my own values and what I thought leadership should be about. And she reminded, hey, look, now's not the time to kind of freak out. That's the time to do something about this. And it's resulted in a continual, and it's still continuing. I'm still enjoying these benefits. So what came up for you? Something to think about. Maybe when you go for a walk later, think about the story. What came up for you? And to reflect on that in your own leadership journey. There are two things here in terms of, it's not like a real assignment here. These are just some tips for how you can be practicing and expanding your capacity for empathy and compassion. And it's really just two actions that you do. You're constantly reflecting and you're constantly engaging. And to reflect well, you're meditating on your actions, you're journaling, you're discussing with others, somebody else who can hold space and just be observing what you've said and your emotions as you're talking about these stories. And they can say, hey, this is what's coming up. And you go, oh, I didn't realize that that's what I was feeling and that's what I'm thinking. Or like, I'm looking agitated as I'm saying that. I didn't think I was agitated, but it's interesting you observe that. So that's how you can build on discussions or reflect through discussions. So it's important that you find the right person to have that discussion who can hold that space. And then number two is to engage, which is to consciously observe others. Passively is good, but when you start being intentful about it, in a meeting, you're really observing people's body language, their tone, what it is that they're saying, or more importantly, what they're not saying. And of course, through more discussions and experimentation. So with that, we've completed the leadership segment of the Accelerator. I hope that this information was helpful and the stories were inspiring for you, that you can take some of the insights and move forward on those in your journey. Please do the quizzes and the assignments because they double down on the learnings that you have. And of course, reach out to us in our messages or on emails and we'll help you, coach you through this part of the process. This is what this Accelerator is for. So on that, best of luck and we'll see you in the next video.